Hey everyone, this is Mr. Miller here, back here on Monday, April 20th here. I want to give a quick shout out to everybody who is faithfully watching my videos at the Kilburn Agency, my mom's employer. I've got this nice handy calendar. I showed you guys this the other day. That's the only way I know what day it is if I look at this calendar. So this is a nice piece here, and these are compliments of them. So thank you. Thanks for being faithful viewers. Probably more faithful than some of my students, or I know more faithful than some of my students. So thank you for that. We're gonna continue on today with topic 15 notes. We left off the other day with 5, which was the Korean War and the stalemate and ceasefire in Korea. So that's where we had kind of left off. So we're going to go ahead and pick up today talking about kind of the Cold War kind of getting a little bit tighter here. America started out doing really well in the Cold War, and then the Soviet Union caught up pretty quickly. So then we need to kind of pay closer attention to them. So we're going to go ahead and get started here in this number 6. I guess we're at. So number 6 here, we've got mutually assured destruction and brinkmanship. Mutually assured destruction to start with. So all of this deals with atomic bombs, nuclear weapons, as you might call them. So the Soviet Union, to begin with, starts testing their first atomic bombs. Remember, when the war ends, when World War II is over, America is the only one in the world with atomic capabilities, with atomic weapons that we can use or that we've successfully used. So it only takes about 4 years for the Soviets to catch up to us in that regard. Soviet Union's tested their first atomic bomb in 1949. So 1949, first atomic bomb weapon test in the Soviet Union. So now they're a nuclear nation just 4 years after the war is over. So America, we end up creating a new type of bomb called a hydrogen bomb, which is many times more powerful than an atomic bomb, or than not an atomic bomb, than an original atomic bomb based on like uranium or plutonium, which they were originally. Many times more powerful. So these are building pretty sizable weapons here. We built our first one of those, I believe. I don't have the date written down on my paper, but I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like 1951. We tested our first hydrogen bomb, and then the Soviets tested theirs a year after. So they were pretty much tied with us in terms of nuclear capabilities by the beginning of the 1950s. So whatever head start we had did not last very long. Now, all of this ends up leading to an idea called mutually assured destruction, which is listed here on our slide. The idea with mutually assured destruction is that if both sides, the United States and the Soviet Union, if both sides have the same weapons or have these very big, devastating nuclear weapons that could destroy the entire world many times over, if both sides have these, both sides are going to be scared to use them. I am not going to fire a nuclear weapon at somebody who is just going to fire one right back at me and wipe me off the face of the earth before my nuclear weapon even hits them. And that was the case. These nuclear weapons that were shot, or that could have been shot, they would have taken 20, 30 minutes to reach their target. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, they're known as. So they would have taken 20, 30 minutes to reach their target sometimes. So the other side would have known that they were firing something, and they would have fired something off, and before any bombs hit, the entire world would be kind of assured of destruction. So the saying here, mutually assured destruction is guaranteed on both sides, is kind of what that phrase means. Destruction is guaranteed. So because it's guaranteed, I am going to be less likely to actually use a nuclear weapon. It's kind of a weird way of thinking about it, but again, if you don't have, like, if you can't take out the other side, if they're just going to take you out as well, you're basically better off just not using them. But you do have them because they're a threatening thing. So the threats are positive, at least a strong part of it. But the other side of it is, okay, nobody's actually going to end up using these weapons. So that's partially true. That's kind of how it goes. So here in this slide here, you have, let me get my mouse over here so you can see. You get both sides over here with bombs that are lined up behind them. But on the bombs, it says on no account to be used because the enemy might retaliate. So we've got all these weapons, these big bombs that we're not going to use because the enemy might try to get back at us if we do it. So instead, we shoot bow and arrows, or we shoot arrows back and forth at each other, which are very, very less dangerous, I guess you might say, compared to an atomic bomb. So that's mutually assured destruction. One of the reasons why we don't end up with another nuclear attack that happens by anybody. So that's part of the reasoning here. Now, America also starts ramping up their threats to the Soviet Union to try to get the Soviet Union to back down. This is a phrase that we call brinkmanship. Brinkmanship is the idea of going to the brink of war, almost going to war, but not completely. And in the process, you kind of scare the other side to backing down. It's kind of like a game of chicken, if you know what I'm talking about with that. Let's say that you're, I don't know, driving two cars. People do this and they're dumb. But let's say you're driving two cars and so you're driving straight towards somebody else. And whoever moves first is quote unquote the chicken, which this is a stupid game. Never do this. And I've never heard of anybody actually doing this. But this is kind of an expression. So playing chicken is kind of the idea. Who's going to flinch first? We're going to go to the brink of war. We're almost going to attack them, but we're not going to, in hopes that they back down. Which most of the time that's what kind of happened. It worked pretty much all the time. There were really no real instances in which America didn't get the Soviet Union to back down. But this is kind of bluffing because I don't know if we would have been willing to go to war at the same time. We might not have been. So it's kind of bluffing. So it's interesting at the very least here. Okay, moving on. Let me get my mouse over here. Moving on. Number 7, the Suez Crisis and the Eisenhower Doctrine. Let's start out with the Suez Crisis. The Suez Crisis is set up, it has to deal with an area right outside of Egypt, or right in Egypt, I guess you might say. The Suez Canal is shown on this map here. In Suez, this would be kind of the, it's just a very, very skinny section of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. The Red Sea opens up into the Atlantic Ocean, or not the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean. I don't think I have a good map of this. I should have gotten a map of this, but I don't. Nope, don't have a map. Oh well. So the Suez Canal would open up right on the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. So what you end up with is this desire to connect the two. It would cut down shipping times, and that's most of the time what people are trying to do with canals. So it cuts down shipping times between Europe and India specifically. Okay, so with the Suez Canal kind of trying to be built here, it would be very beneficial to some European nations to get this thing built. So basically what Egypt was trying to do was they were kind of auctioning this thing off. They wanted a dam built on the Nile River to kind of control the Nile River a little bit more, which goes right through Egypt and is kind of a major river there. You know that from global history, hopefully. So to kind of auction that off, they wanted assistance building that dam. And in return, they would give people use of the Suez Canal. They would have cut it off from us otherwise, really. So they go to a few different people. The United States, we volunteer to pay for this dam. The USSR, the Soviet Union, they volunteer to pay for the dam. England and France, they're both very interested because they need the shipping lane to be able to ship to India and other places. So America, though, we catch wind of the fact that Egypt has entered into a bidding war here with the Soviets, and we don't like that. We don't like the fact that the Soviet Union has kind of been put up against us here, and we don't really want to compete with them. So what we do is we end up kind of getting out of this whole thing and saying, nope, we're not building this dam. Go build it yourself, or get your other friends to help you, because we don't want to be taken advantage of, like the Egyptians were trying to do to us. So Egypt, what they start doing is they start limiting oil for America, for us, also for England and France, some of our allies in Europe. So they start limiting oil. And so as a result, England and France end up sending soldiers to Egypt to try to get Egypt to back down and try to get Egypt to stop restricting oil for their areas. So Egypt kind of is trying to be, or I guess England and France are trying to force Egypt's hand a little bit here. They want America's help, though, because I guess the French and the English can't do it all on their own. So they want the United States to come in and help them fight against Egypt. However, America says, nope, we're not going to do that. We are not interested in playing these games. So we remove all help from Egypt, and England and France ultimately have to leave. So we refuse to help out there. So the Suez Canal, the Suez Crisis, ends up kind of being, a big to do about not a ton, but it's a big to do about using a canal. So this prompts the president at the time, whose name is Dwight D. Eisenhower, his name's in the title there, Eisenhower, prompts him to come up with a doctrine. Now, presidents come up with doctrines to give off certain ideas. That's what happens. So the president comes up with a doctrine. He says, kind of going against what happened in the Suez Crisis, he says if there is any Middle Eastern country who is kind of under the threat of communism, America is going to come in and help out. So any Middle Eastern country, any countries in the areas over here that are threatened by communism, we will step in and help them out if we need to. Now, again, that kind of runs counter to what the Suez Crisis was, because Eisenhower refused to help out in that case. However, we're kind of taking more of a stance here, more of an official stance on what we're going to do in the Middle East here. Now, let's go ahead and go on to number 8. Okay, number 8 happens to be a very interesting topic, also a fairly sad topic for some people. It's kind of humorous, and any laughter that I get in this is nervous laughter. Okay, it is not inhumane laughter. It's just nervous laughter. Okay, it happens to me, happens to the best of us. You just talk about a topic that you really don't like talking about, and you just start laughing a little bit. So this is nervous laughter. So the space race here, number 8. In October of 1957, the Soviet Union launches a satellite up into the sky, and I've got the name of the satellite here. The name of the satellite is Sputnik 1. Sputnik 1. So this satellite here, Sputnik 1, is just this metal ball that is pictured here in black on the left. So this metal ball with these 4 antennae on it. It's not a huge thing, but it is a satellite. It goes up in the sky, and it has receivers and transponders in it, and sensors, and those sensors get sent back down to Earth. So this thing orbits for a little while, I want to say a few weeks, and then ultimately comes down. I'm blanking kind of on that, so I apologize. I don't have the great details on that. But Sputnik 1 ends up being a success for the Soviets. Now, next thing the Soviets want to do is they launch another satellite 1 month later, and you can guess the name of this satellite is Sputnik 2, because what else would you name your satellite? You got to name it an unoriginal name, like the first one. Okay, so Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2, there you go. So Sputnik 2 was launched in November of 1957, and Sputnik 2 was very well known, or at least noteworthy, for another reason. It was bigger than Sputnik 1, but it also carried aboard the first living being to go into space, a dog. Okay, it carried a dog. Now, the dog's name, and this is sad, the dog's name is Laika. And as you can guess, next to it, it says RIP. Okay, and if you know what that means, it means rest in peace, because Laika ended up dying up in space. Okay, and this is what makes this a little bit nervous laughter for me. Okay, so what they did was the Soviets ended up finding some stray dog in Moscow, and they strapped this dog into this satellite and launched it up into space. There was apparently enough room for the dog to walk around a little bit, enough room for the dog to stand up and lay down, and the dog had supposedly enough food for a while. That was like gelatin food, but it was like jelly, and it had some water. However, they figure that the dog, like in the summertime, okay, when you sit in a car and it's a hot car, and you go inside to Walmart or something and you have your dog in the back, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to take your dog with you, maybe not into Walmart, but you're not supposed to leave your dog in the car. Okay, even if you crack the window, you're not supposed to do that because the temperature can rise really, really high. The Soviets did not really understand this, and they also did not understand that a metal ball whizzing through space would gain temperature. So what ends up happening is after like 4 revolutions of the Earth, which happened like within, I want to say like just a handful of minutes, a couple, like an hour or two, when this satellite's whizzing through space, it's gaining temperature. So it ends up being like they figured, and they had a bunch of sensors, and they had the dog rigged up with sensors and whatnot. And so they knew that the dog was alive after four rotations or 4 revolutions of the Earth. And then they realized that the temperature was like at 110 degrees, and then the dog apparently died shortly thereafter. The Soviets originally said that the dogs survived for a week up in space, but then have since, the Russians have since, when the Soviet Union kind of collapsed in 1990, they revised that and said, no, she died within a few hours. So the dog did not return back to space safely, unfortunately. So Laika, rest in peace. We will not forget you. And Laika is pictured here in the center picture. That is the picture of Laika, the stray dog from Moscow. I don't know what they got in their heads. They're just like, okay, let's just find a dog and launch her into space. And so here's a picture of the bigger Sputnik 2 satellite over on the right. So kind of interesting for what it's worth. Now, this all leads the Americans to be very, very, very worried about this, okay? Think about this. We did not have any satellites in space. We did not have any space capabilities. We were years away at this point, and the Soviets had just launched 2 satellites in space within a month of each other. And now we are like, holy cow, we got to pick ourselves up here, and we've got to catch up to the Soviet Union. So we end up creating a group that is pictured down there in the bottom called NASA, and NASA stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA ends up pumping $1 billion into education for science-related things. 1 billion, billion. So $1 billion for science-related education, because we realized that we were very, very far behind. There's stories of people sitting in a classroom one morning in high school or elementary school, and they're sitting in their classroom learning science, and people from the government come into their classroom, take all the textbooks they've been using and give them brand new textbooks, and give the teacher a brand new textbook and say, this is what you're teaching now, because this has important stuff to go to space. And it had physics, and it had aeronautics, and it had all sorts of things that you weren't taught beforehand unless you went into very specialized careers. So NASA ends up kind of being a forerunner, kind of the beginning of our space exploration. So that is what it is. Think about this. We went from when NASA was created in the beginning of 1958 to 11 years later, setting foot on the moon if you believe that story, which I do, but some people don't. 11 years later, setting foot on the moon, that's a pretty crazy change from not having any understanding of it really at all, going to having somebody on the moon. So pretty crazy, I think. Now, last thing that we're going to talk about today is the Red Scare, the beginning of the Red Scare. 9, 10, and 11 are all going to be dealing with this Red Scare. Cold War fears at home, it says under the big heading there. So this Red Scare, we have had a few Red Scares in American history. There's this one. There's also a Red Scare that happens during World War I and shortly thereafter. We had talked about Palmer raids. We had talked about, I don't know, a bunch of different things. So Sacco and Vanzetti, we talked about the Italian anarchists who were accused of murder and robbery and then put to death. Basically put to death, even though there was no, what's it called, evidence in there or against them, no solid evidence. So the Red Scare here is very similar. Red Scare refers to communism, refers to being fearful of communists. So the idea here in the Red Scare was that communists are in our country, they're in America, and they are going to take over, and we will not be able to stop them once they do. So we need to find them before they can do that. So we must hunt down these communists and find them all. So that is the idea of the Red Scare. Now, there are a couple different major things that we got to talk about in this Red Scare. First one is listed here in green. It is the House Un-American Activities Committee. House Un-American Activities Committee. And it is referred to by an acronym known as HUAC, H-U-A-C, HUAC. So HUAC is what we will refer to it as from here on out. But this House Un-American Activities Committee. It is a government group created by the House of Representatives that is set up to try to find communists in America, to try to find communists. So they're investigating possible communists around the country. Now, the picture here on the left is a picture of HUAC and the proceedings that are going on here. You would have a bunch of congressmen, congressmen, maybe some women, but mostly men, actively interviewing and questioning people based on their activities and whether or not they were communist or not, or trying to find out if they were communist. So it's this big, for lack of a better word, witch hunt, so to speak. This is related very heavily to the Crucible. If you guys remember the Crucible, the Salem witch trials, that whole thing, I think you got there in 11th grade English before we broke off for the year, or at least before we started teaching from home. The Crucible was written by Arthur Miller. No relation to me, but he was a playwright and an author during the middle of the 1950s. So he writes The Crucible in response to this Red Scare in the 1950s. So that's the context that he writes this in. Now, there were another, I guess, a famous group here of people that I need to mention, and they are listed here in red down there at the bottom, called the Hollywood 10. The Hollywood 10. The Hollywood 10, you can guess, Hollywood. There are movie stars, there are movie producers, writers, directors, and there's 10 of them. Okay, that's where they get their name from, the Hollywood 10. They are basically people who refuse to answer questions from HUAC. So they are pictured here on the right, on the far right of the screen. They are people who are refusing to answer HUAC's questions, and as a result, they are put on trial and sent to prison, because if Congress asks you questions and you refuse to answer them, you repeatedly refuse to answer them, you can get charged with contempt of Congress. It's not coronavirus, I promise. You can get charged with a thing called contempt of Congress. Contempt of Congress is something that you can get put in jail for, meaning you're basically stopping Congress from doing their job. Now, if you were to plead the Fifth Amendment, that is different. Basically, these people just refused to answer any questions and refused to show up in some cases. So they get sent to prison for this. So the Hollywood 10, they try to stonewall Congress here in some cases and get in trouble for it. Now, a lot of times Hollywood producers and writers and directors, they would oftentimes be a little bit more of a communist sort of mindset than other people. So they were kind of targeted in some cases. A lot of actors, a lot of actresses, a lot of people in those areas were very active in the very liberal parts of society. So similar to today, I guess you might say. So that's part of the reason why they're kind of targeted here, is because they were, I guess, more likely to be communists. So they get kind of hunted down, not legitimately hunted down, but asked questions. And when they don't answer their questions, the government doesn't like it that much. Okay, so that's all I got for you today. I have a couple essential questions. I need to actually see if there's a couple or not. I think there's a couple. Let me see what the plan is. Yes, 2 questions. Okay, 2 questions to answer. 2 questions. So 2 essential questions to answer. So go ahead and answer those questions right now, and then I will see you guys back here tomorrow. So that's all I got for today. Answer those questions. See you tomorrow. Turn in any old work if you haven't already. Please do. I'm trying to get some grades in. So do that, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Take care.